After 4 weeks of pre-launch tournaments, I think I finally figured out what decks are gonna win Vegas. Hey everybody, Espira, and welcome back to another Battle Spirit Saga video. This time we're gonna be going over the multiple weeks of pre-launch tournaments that I've been hosting, and then kind of going over the meta so that we can understand what is going to most likely take down the launch events. If you don't know, I've been hosting tournaments over on the Battle Spirits Discord, and I want to bring it together as a way to start getting people some data and stuff like that. I saw that, generally some people were playtesting, but they're all kind of like one-off groups in different voice channels, and I figured since no one else was taking the mantle of trying to get the community some metadata and get them to understand kind of what the game looks like when you really give it a little bit of a competitive angle, well then, let's throw some juice into that. And that's why I've jumped into hosting as many tournaments as I have. So up until now, we've done 4 tournaments for the circuit tournament, and then I've done one-shot tournaments for European and Australian friendly time zones. So we're gonna go over the meta of that in the first section, and then we're just gonna go over what the best lists look like in terms of things that I've topped and kind of give you an idea, because obviously every build is going to be different, but generally speaking, kind of give you an idea of what people are going to be playing and what is likely to going to see a lot of success over through the launch events. Jumping right into week 1 here, a lot of purple, a decent amount of white. And white is one of those things where it's like, we've been talking for a long time about how white is one of the more quote unquote disappointing colors, just because it doesn't have a lot of advantage. It felt like it was losing a lot. It feels like it didn't have a lot of what the other colors have, even though the few things that it did have were incredibly powerful. And a big tone and theme of what you're going to be seeing through these meta charts throughout the weeks is that white really kind of hones in on the best parts of what it does and then focuses around that. It turns out the best way to play white is to just play all the really, really good cards that it has in terms of like all the boss monsters. Like, which ones do we play? All of them. And then you try and support that around trying to get enough card advantage from other colors and enough tools in other colors to be able to deal against what's happening. Otherwise, purple is always going to be almost the most popular color week after week after week after week in almost every single tournament I run. Purple is going to be up there. Nova tops a lot. So while it isn't the most represented decks, it does top quite a bit. Then we got yellow. Yellow will be the least represented color throughout the entire thing. Not a bunch of people have played a ton of yellow. And generally the ones that have been successful have leaned more on the 2-drop aggro / Fable B side. Sometimes they'll run a luster top end, but yellow is deeply underrepresented. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more when we go into the summary slide. Otherwise, you have a smattering of other colors, right? You have a bunch of... for what it's worth, week 1, I was still trying to figure out what's the best way to categorize them. And I believe week 3 onwards is when I actually hone in on what the different archetypes are and then tighten it up. But generally speaking, in terms of week 1, what you're looking at is a lot of purple, a decent amount of white. Red converts well. So it doesn't have a lot of numbers, but it tends to perform in terms of the decks that end up placing. And then yellow is kind of falling off, and then you have a smattering of decks that mishmash between the two. From there, we're moving on to week 2, and there you're kind of just seeing a lot more of the same. More white generally being represented through the rainbow, red, white. But again, purple is still up there. The splash red is primarily for Burning Force. And then in red, you see the same thing. So generally from week 2 to week 1, you don't see a whole ton. You do see quite a bit of a difference moving on to week 3, but that's because I finally start categorizing things as archetypes, because now I understand kind of what the main engines are, so on and so forth. And here we're actually seeing a lot of gain from Elephant Control. So we do see it, and now it's called Elephant Control. The big basis is that Elephant's an incredibly good card, and utilizing an early Elephant to be able to ramp and draw is what allows you to be able to place yourself in a place where you can make the big plays like Enterprise, like Elk, and so on and so forth. Purple is still doing incredible things. The big thing with the purple deck is basically it's a Basculus deck. So right now I use Curse Dragon on the charts, but eventually I shift over to Basculus. Or Baculus, whatever. Because while, Curse Dragon is like the splashy thing, the whole deck centralizes around that you can utilize Core Drain, and you can use Baculus to basically destroy anything. From there, Nova, of course, has its strong representation. And from here, we really see how the pie chart breaks down, where, some people have named them the big 3, where it's basically you have Elephant Control, you have Purple Good Stuff, Baculus combo, whatever you want to call it, Curse Dragon combo, however you want to name it. And then you've got Nova. And then you kind of have the rest of which you got Pterosaur, you got 2-cost aggro, you got yellow, you got people trying out different things. Moving on to the final week 4, we do see purple making a comeback. And here I shift over and I realize that these decks are really more Baculus decks. They utilize cards like Mummy and like Spider Demon and stuff like that that aren't great by themselves, but the fact that with the combo with Baculus, you kind of destroy anything on the board is a huge deal. So we see that be at the forefront of the meta. From there, Elephant Control is still going to be doing a thing. The big shift here is Terra Nova. Now, what's Terra Nova? It's a Nova deck. However, you shift off some of your early stuff to pivot more into a Pterosaur deck that has a Nova combo. So I'd say you're primarily still a Nova deck because you don't have that kind of like density that a pure Pterosaur deck has, but you are utilizing the best parts of a Pterosaur deck to be able to fight a good early game. And that's primarily because the white matchup can be a little tough, especially once they get their armor reds and everything. It can be a little tough to punch through. So we use the big Pterosaur bodies to fight through that and be able to make it so that white can't establish big boards that then, you know, red is just stuck staring at. Already Nova decks all the way in set 1 we're utilizing Pterosaur and Emperor Beast early bodies to be able to kind of like get Confront going, and you have the Parasaur to be able to draw cards. This is just kind of a normal, natural enhancement of that. That's not to say that Nova doesn't do its thing. Pure Nova decks are successful as well. It's just the Terra Nova deck techs into being able to deal with white decks better. From there, Purple Beatdown actually sees a big shift. Players utilizing a earlier low to the ground purple top end, using curse bodies. Some of them use vanillas even. Some of them is more like a shadow build. So they're an aggro deck, but they utilize shadows. But they all kind of generalize around utilizing an aggro early purple top end and then utilizing the control options in the late game to try to close out the game. And that's kind of where like those variations on purple decks have landed. Otherwise, Michaela Beatdown is basically a 2-drop deck that utilizes a Michaela top end or like a luster top end. So it's not really a luster deck. It just uses some luster pieces to be able to break the board at the end of the game. So you use your early advantage with like your 2-drops and all that, chip away at life. And then at the end of the game, you use like a Michaela to be able to board wipe or remove whatever is really causing you to not be able to close out the game. And then you go and close out the game. Otherwise, the smattering of our decks, purple, red, good stuff, is like a purple deck that's also using the Nova combo, so on and so forth. And then you just got a bunch of other decks. The biggest one to mention here would be Fabled Beasts. So in terms of the yellow deck, they haven't seen a ton of representation, but from my conversations with like Cosmic and a bunch of other yellow players, the landing is that Fabled Beast is probably the best way. So you incorporate a little bit of the 2-drop engine, utilizing a lot of Fabled Beast, and generally that gives you kind of your best odds to be able to break boards and also push damage. So what does that all look like? Well, if we take a summary of all 4 weeks, the overall from 130 decks, numbers might be skewed a little bit because sometimes people submit a second deck and I forget to delete, but generally speaking, when you're looking at the entirety, purple is the most represented color, and almost every single week that happened to be the truth. Elephant Control being the second most represented color, Nova and a bunch of different variations of Nova representing in a third. And then you have your smattering of other stuff, right? So you got your Pterosaur, Luster, Elk, 2-drop aggro, whatever. But generally speaking, the first 3 are really what centralizes and establishes the meta, and then the rest kind of find their way in there. There's a couple of things to say, and I think we'll go when we get an example of every single deck. But generally speaking, I think while this is representative of a meta where everyone who's playing knows what's going on, is well versed in how the game plays, has been practicing for weeks on weeks on weeks, and has a knowledge of the card base that spans 2 months long, I don't think this is going to be fully representative of what we're going to see at the launch events. I think yellow is going to see a lot more play. I think red is going to see more play. Why is that? Yellow is a very introductory friendly color. A lot of people I know are really on yellow because they just think that the archetype plays lean. They like the notion of like the luster OTK, right? It's very approachable. Things that are very approachable are things that you're going to have to learn to deal with. You're going to see more aggro. I know some people are just going to take their demo deck and turn cards sideways, or they might use the upgrades that I made. So if you guys want to know how to upgrade your demo deck, video up in the corner. You guys can go check that out in the ways that I would modify if I was using budget. A lot of people are going to be on a budget. Not everyone's going to be able to crunch up a lot of boxes, get their playset of ice shields, and be able to go from there. So generally speaking, while I do think eventually, if everyone has access to cards, the meta would naturally evolve to something looking like this, I will say it's a very skewed bubble meta that only remains true in as far as what the Discord has played. And of course, the way that I ran my circuits, they were 3-round tournaments because they were played on a weekday, and I want to be considerate of those who had to work the next day. So it was always capped at 3 rounds. So while we did track undefeated decks, and generally you could see some trends in terms of the decks that were going undefeated, this is more of like an idea of what people could play. But I do want to keep in mind that this is what very experienced players, there's going to be a lot of players who are going to be playing for the first time or only have really gotten experience over the last couple of weeks. And as far as topping results, you couldn't skew based on the best deck because it wasn't always deterministic on which best deck there was, because any given week you could have 3 to 4 undefeated decks. With that said, let's jump into examples. I have one deck of every single color that has gone undefeated or has done incredibly well in my tournaments, just to give you guys an idea of what those are looking like. First off, it is Kakimiya's version of Nova. This is like a pure Nova build. So if you want to know what someone going into it just wanting to run like a clean Nova build is, this is what you're looking at. The 8 draw cards between Starblast Draw and Charge Draw. You're running the 4 Andromedas, you're running a full 4 of between the Sigworm and the Nova, and you're just going for consistency. Alternatively, you use a little bit of a Pterosaur bottom end in terms of Parasaur, as well as the Horn Grizzly to be able to mitigate the board and get additional advantage. This is as clean as it looks. This is as pure as these versions of the decks look like. When you're talking about the Terra Nova decks, which is the pivot that some players have made to be able to deal with white a little bit better, basically you sub out Rain Needle for Raptidon, I think is what it's called, something like that. The dinosaur one drop, the stat lines are basically exactly the same. And then you bring in Gigano Rex as a 2 of, and then you like sideboard the rest. That's how you would modify this deck if you're looking to shift into the Terra Nova build. Then we've got purple, of course. Like I've said, purple lives and thrives off of Baculus. So what you're really doing is you're a Baculus deck who has a bunch of incidental cards that allow you to be able to remove 1 core. This is where we see Mummy. This is where we see Spider Demon. Mordred comes in. So while these cards don't have amazing stat lines, actually Mordred is not bad, but the Spider Demon and Mummy have terrible stats. You're okay with that because with the combo of Baculus, or with a way that you can force your opponent into 1 core, you can put them in a really good position to be able to get rid of stuff. And then they happen to be in that sweet spot of 4 and 5 drops that trigger Immortal, meaning that you're going to get those additional value from your Beldegor. With that said, be mindful when you play against purple. They have a lot of ways to interact with exhausted spirits. So just be mindful about the way you go and exhaust your spirits before you deal with purple. But generally speaking, this is kind of what every deck does. There are variations on how many mummies you play, how many spider demons you play. Some people bring in some more shadow cards. Some people don't play Pendacles. I personally like Pendacles. So generally speaking, this is what you're looking at in terms of like what the purple decks are trying to do. If you're going into yellow, you're looking at a kind of Fabled Beast build. And Hippocampo's in this deck, so for you guys don't know, it's the little hippo right there in the middle. It's a 3 cost that has Blessed. When it deals damage, you gain 1 life. A lot of us have landed on that this card was bad. I still think it kind of is because it's pretty underwhelming, but the way that people play out the game very slowly, they tend to play a Nexus on turn 1, and you just find a lot of outs in which Hippocampo can actually get in there. So it's not like the gaining the 1 life doesn't change the game, but Hippocampo being on the board forces your opponent to play in a weird way, which sometimes is suboptimal, which is incredibly funny. Maybe it's funnier than I give it credit for. I think I've been surprised by it the more and more it's seeing play. But generally speaking, in terms of the deck as a whole, you are a deck that is kind of a fusion of 2-drop aggro alongside using Fabled Beasts. The God Beast is a Fabled Beast, which means it can be drawn off of Turtle. You use the Phantasmal Paradise here to be able to draw cards on play. So there's a play in which you have 2 or 3 of those. You can play a Fabled Beast, and then you're going to be able to draw 3 cards as well. So it gives you that advantage in case the Cathedral plan doesn't work, because Cathedral can be played around. Your opponent can destroy your board in a way in which Cathedral won't proc. So you have to be mindful of that. And Phantasmal is kind of one of those ways to get around that. And the deck will need a lot of tech. The biggest tech that I think is super important if you guys plan on playing a yellow deck, you need to run Enterprise. Here we're main decking 2 of them with a 3rd one in the sideboard. If you're playing against red or purple, they have so many tools to make it incredibly hard for you to succeed that you kind of just need to do it. Red, they can destroy your Nexuses, and then they have Nova, and then Nova is just going to kill your board over and over and over again. Purple, they have removal for days, and if you try to go wide, 1 core here, 1 core here, 1 core here, if you go super wide, they can Curse Dragon you, and then you lose your whole board. So generally speaking, while it doesn't protect you against everything, the combo of having Enterprise on board with the other stuff is huge. And then we have Fulla in the sideboard where, hey, if we are playing against purple and they're using core removal stuff, we want to make sure that we can protect our Enterprise, preventing him from going down below level 3 and no longer giving protection to everything. So it's just something to be aware of. The problem is your purple, like your 2 matchups aren't great. Your opponent can still beat you even through that, but that is what you're probably going to have to do as a yellow deck to give yourself the best shot to be able to compete against primarily red and purple, which are everywhere, like we know. And finally, no fancy graph here, because while Elephant Control is one of the most represented colors in my tournament, the 2nd most represented across all of the tournaments, it has not gone undefeated. And this is the biggest thing I want people to concern themselves with. white is a good color in as far as having amazing late game options. But there are two things that are really bad for white. First off, sometimes you just lose to yourself. White still does have the issues where it cannot draw the level of advantage that competes against other decks. So if you draw a clunky hand, you may lose off of the back that you don't have a way to deal with what your opponent is doing, and you're just going to die. Secondarily, this deck is incredibly slow. Elk does speed that up for you, but nevertheless, you are a deck that's going to have to succeed on the backs of turns 6, 7, 8, 9, and even then, you're going to have to fight through your opponent consistently dealing with your board. So while you can prevent yourself from dying, the line in which you're getting yourself from not dying to winning takes a extremely long time. I've seen some white decks utilize Doomdina to be able to kind of swing with their board, and then that's how you mitigate the fact that you can't close out games. You're just going to be able to swing through with unblockable spirits. That can definitely do that. But again, your opponent's going to have ice shields and is going to be able to defend themselves from that kind of thing for 1 or 2 turns. So it's tough. It's a very popular color and a very popular strategy. And if you want to look at what a general build looks like, this is Otter's build, I believe. I took the screenshot from Cooler, who actually ended up winning the European tournament. However, I think it was Otter's build that inspired it. Nevertheless, what you're trying to do for elephants, you want to play elephants. Elk and Enterprise are huge, and then you got to make sure that you have Fulla. Here we have them in the main because guess what? Purple is the most represented color. So yes, Fulla is not great against any other color, but in combo with Enterprise and knowing that purple is as represented is not the end of the world. And then we just hedge out the deck with card draw from Star Blessed Draw and then removal in the terms of Burning Force and things like that. So generally speaking, if you're going to play white, I've given you my cautions. There's a likelihood that you're going to go to time a lot. And sometimes you just lose to the fact that you don't draw well at all. And you don't have a ton of advantage in your deck to be able to mitigate that. Nevertheless, you can do powerful things. And if you set up your end board, it feels like your opponent can't do anything against you. And that does feel incredibly good and incredibly exciting. So those are the decks that I think are going to be doing incredibly well and are the most likely to not only top, but potentially win out in this weekend's launch event. Thanks everyone who's been participating in my tournaments. I couldn't have collected all this data without you guys, and I'm so glad to be able to share this metadata and deck lists with you guys. There's going to be a link in the description where I hosted all the decks. So if I don't have them organized by win record, because that would have taken me too much time, and unfortunately I'm too busy, especially getting prepared for Vegas myself. But if you guys want examples of what some of the other decks I wasn't able to showcase here are, the link in the description will have a spreadsheet that has everything. And then from there, you guys will be able to see if a deck inspires you or give you ideas for your own deck building. With that said, guys, let me know in the comments what you guys think is going to win the launch events and what you guys will be playing if you'll be going over to those events in Vegas, Chile, London, and in Australia. Sydney? Is it Sydney? I think it's Sydney. Either way, subscribe button's in the corner if you guys want to watch more of the content. With that said, I'll catch you guys on the next one. Ciao.